Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jenny Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn, and we have one of our favorite guests back this week.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I'm Charles Johnson, and this is my, third appearance on this podcast?
I
No.
think so.
I.
Well, actually, technically fourth, but third actual, major role.
Yeah, this is a topic that Charlie is far more familiar with than either Diane or I, or at least half of it. He's
Half of
far more
it.
familiar with than either Diane or I. But before we get into today's topic and episode, we just want to thank our listeners for our last week's episode when we announced
Yeah.
our second podcast that will be coming in 2026. Again, if you're interested in being on that one has to do specifically with Colorado history. So, not just Colorado cemeteries, but all of Colorado's history. And if you haven't had a chance to listen yet to know what we mean by all of that, please go back and give it a listen. And then, if you are in Colorado, or maybe you've lived here and you've moved away, but you know a really good piece of really cool
Yes.
Colorado history and you want to share it with us, you can send us an email through our website. You can just click the contact us and send us an email, or the email is ordinaryextraordinarycemetery@gmail.com. I got it right this time.
We'll
And you
email
can,
ourselves.
yeah, and let us know. We will start recording episodes for that podcast probably in June or July as we get guests lined up. It will be, with the exception of maybe one episode, it will be an entirely guest driven
Mhm.
podcast. And it is to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Colorado becoming a state in 1876. We became a country in
Right.
1776, which also coincides with the release of this podcast. But we will be specifically focusing on Colorado history for that podcast. And I actually enjoyed, I went back and I listened to all of the clips that we put together from our Colorado related episodes on this
Mhm.
podcast. And some of them I hadn't listened to since we did
We
those
did. Uh-huh.
episodes. And it was really fun to go back and listen to, especially our guests that had stories to share. I had such a blast listening to it the next day when it aired, because after we got it all put together, because I didn't necessarily fully listen to all those clips when we were putting the episode together. I was going back
Right.
through the transcripts and saying, okay, this section works and this section works, and tried to kind of create this storyline. So, yes, I really enjoyed hearing some things that I'd kind of forgotten we'd shared on this podcast before. And it was a lot of fun. So, if you haven't listened to last week's episode, which was B217, give it a listen. It was so much fun to go back and hear our guests and remember some little Colorado
Right.
history tidbits.
Hmm.
So, today, as we promised also last week, we are talking about some fictional cemeteries that are used in video games and their real life counterparts that inspired them. And so, what Charlie is doing with us today is he will explain the video game side of things and kind of how these cemeteries are used and places. They're not all cemeteries, there is a plantation and a ghost town as well, but how these places in these video games are used. And then Diane and I are going to share the history of the real life locations that inspired the video game versions to give you the actual history of some of these places. So, Charlie, what are the two video games that we're talking about?
Uh, so the two video games we're going to be talking about is one is twice the age of the other. The first one is Left 4 Dead 2 by Valve Studios, and the second one is Red Dead Redemption 2 by Rockstar Studios.
And what is the premise of, well, tell us the premise of each game. Like, what's kind of the
All right.
storyline behind each game?
Left 4 Dead 2, made in 2009 by Valve, was released on Steam and PC and consoles. Left 4 Dead 2 follows, I believe, 3 weeks after a sudden infection sweeps across basically most of the US and probably the entire world. And it turns people into zombies, but not like anything like the slow walking corpses kind, more of like the running, what most people consider infected kind, the scarier kind in my opinion. And you follow four survivors who just want to go from point A to point B, get picked up, and hopefully make it to some sort of safe zone uh, by the end. And the final chapter in the game before you actually make it to one of these safe zones actually takes place directly in the city of New Orleans. And that, obviously has the cemeteries in it. However, Red Dead Redemption 2, made by Rockstar Games, released on consoles and PC. All right,
In 2018.
in 2018. I forgot the
Oh,
year.
wait, you mean you can play Red Dead Redemption on your computer?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no,
That's how
it's
Charlie plays it.
yeah, a lot of games you can play on your computer. In fact, because with how like computer hardware works, it's actually mostly the superior way to do it.
Well, like when before we started and the three of us were just chatting, I said I haven't played a video game since Nintendo 64 Mario Kart, but I have seen and heard of Red Dead Redemption, and because it's a Western, I sort of was interested in playing, but I didn't want to have to buy a console and all that other stuff. But
Nope, you just need a computer, which you have.
Yeah. You might need to like check what hardware you need for it, but yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's definitely good.
So give
Oh
us a
dear.
synopsis of Red Dead
Yeah,
Redemption 2.
Red Dead Redemption 2, released in 2018 by Rockstar Studios, follows the late Wild West period in 1899. Uh, and most of it is a lead up. It's a prequel and a lead up to the original Red Dead Redemption, released in, I think, 2011 or 2007. I have to look that up actually.
It's
But
okay.
the original Red Dead Redemption uh, has a lot of things that it implies through its story, but never really delves into because it follows way after 1899, because the original game is set in 1911, but the second game, since it happens before that, is 1899 and delves into the story plots mentioned but not covered in the
Mhm.
original game. However, one of the locations in game is known as Saint Denis, which is very much based off of New Orleans, but is also just typical of like large industrial cities of the time with like huge factories and like rail car systems and stuff like that that would, you know, kind of seem very unsanitary to us
Okay.
today because this is pre-sanitation movement. Um, but yeah, one of the locations is also known as the Saint Denis Cemetery, and one of the in-game missions actually does take place there, where you try to win the trust of a criminal gang leader in the city so that he can help you basically secure a ship and escape the Pinkertons that are after you.
Ha 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 ha, the Pinkertons.
Yeah.
So we are going to start today by talking about the Louisiana cemeteries in Left for Dead. We're going to start with that subject. And if you're following us on YouTube, Charlie, if you cover your webcam for just a moment, there you go. So if you take a look at the screen behind Charlie here, you can see the top two photos are photos of the actual St. Roch Cemetery or St. Roch Cemetery in New Orleans. And actually, I believe these are both from cemetery number 2 of those. And then the two bottom pictures that you're seeing are screenshots from the game. And so you can really see how they did take the inspiration of those above ground tombs and they used them in the game. And there's actually, it's much more extensive. Charlie had actually sent me more screenshots of this, which I can probably share with you guys on social media. But you can definitely see the inspiration from these above ground cemeteries that New Orleans is famous for. So Charlie, why don't you tell us in gameplay what this cemetery is used for? I think,
Right.
I mean, you kind of did already, but
Yeah.
go ahead and tell us a little bit more about this part of the game.
So in Left 4 Dead 2, because New Orleans is under a bombing campaign to try to drive out all the zombies within it, uh, part of the road that the group of survivors that you play as are moving through gets bombed, you have to take a detour through a cemetery that is actually based off of just kind of generally cemeteries, but according to the wiki that I used to get a lot of this research, is based off of the St. Louis Cemetery specifically. But the name of it is St. Rocks with an ES rather than an S, like this top photo right up here. The name is St. Rocks Cemetery, and effectively you just use that as a shortcut to find a checkpoint that actually leads to the evacuation center. And while it has been kind of long since abandoned, you do find one helicopter left that can actually take you to the evac site. Well, not evac site, to the safe zone. And it is because of this that actually, like, weirdly enough, being in a cemetery where there's a bunch of zombies around you is more hopeful than anywhere else in the game.
Because as you said, well, you mentioned it before we started recording, that the zombies are attracted to the bombing sounds.
Yes.
So they're staying kind of out of the cemetery for the most
Yes.
part.
There's a lot, there is definitely a lot of them still in there, but every time one of the bombs goes off, it usually moves away some of the zombies towards wherever the bomb went off. Unfortunately, that does mean some of the bombs go off near you, and so that just brings a horde towards you.
Ugh, fun.
Yeah.
And just so folks know, both of these games are definitely for adults.
Yes, they're rated M.
Yes. So if you have younger members in your household, I don't necessarily recommend these games. There's a lot of violence in both of them,
Yeah.
and they're definitely meant for older players for both games. And even though there's a lot of history and a lot of real things going on, they're still not meant for like younger kids.
Yeah.
Just throw that out there. So this St. Roch Cemetery, we went and looked up the actual St. Roch Cemetery that is in real life, and there's two of them. There's Cemetery number 1 and Cemetery number 2, and they're both in New Orleans. And the first one was founded in 1874, so that's St. Roch Cemetery number 1, and it was founded by the Reverend Peter Leonard Thieves, who served as the pastor of Holy Trinity Church, which is now the Merigeny. I don't know if I'm saying this right. I apologize to any of our listeners in Louisiana, but the Merigeny Opera House. And it was created to cater to his predominantly German congregation at the time, which is not one you hear about as much when we think of New Orleans. We think of like a bunch of other populations, but not necessarily German. And the cemetery was named Campo Santo to honor the Campo Santo di Tedici, which is located on the south side of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and which served as a cemetery, church, and hospice for Germans. And while they differ in design, sorry, I lost my notes there. Both St. Roch Cemetery number 1 and Campo Santo di Tedici feature the 14 Stations of the Cross. And currently, the Way of the Cross in St. Roch Cemetery number 1 is represented by statues carved in Italy by the workshop of Italian sculptor Enrico Aragini. And it was donated by families, individuals, and other religious groups, and it was installed in 1948. And these statues replaced the earlier versions that were originally carved in low relief on wood and later made of terracotta, and some of which were illustrated in lithographs. So they used a bunch of different things for the original version.
Oh gosh, I bet it was beautiful.
Oh, either version of it, I mean, not having been there, but either version sounds absolutely stunning.
On September 6, 1875, St. Roch Cemetery number 1 was dedicated, and the cornerstone of the Gothic-style St. Roch Chapel was laid. Designed and built by Reverend Thieves in gratitude for the protection of St. Roch during the yellow fever epidemic of 1867, the chapel stands at the cemetery's heart. Over the years, the mortuary chapel has gained a reputation as a healing space and has become a pilgrimage site for those seeking spiritual solace or healing. Throughout its history, the chapel has received ex-votos from the faithful, expressing gratitude for St. Roch's intercession. These offerings include plaster cast of healed body parts and carved tokens inscribed with messages of thanks.
So definitely a sanctuary place.
Yes.
either way, whether you're in the game or whether you're in real life, people are going to, be thankful for and kind of get away from what was going on. And obviously a yellow fever epidemic, which were very common in certain parts of our country at that time, depending on where you lived. And definitely in the South, was not surprising. So they celebrated the first Mass. The Reverend Thieves celebrated the first Mass shortly after on All Souls Day, which was November 2nd, 1876, with the chapel serving as the focal point. Masonry tombs were built along the central pathway, which is kind of what you can see behind Charlie in the photo there. And they were, while the in-ground graves were initially marked with just simple wooden crosses.
To ensure the continued growth of St. Roch Cemetery, masonry monuments were neatly arranged along dedicated alleys. And so then St. Roch Cemetery number 2 was enclosed and opened for single in-ground graves around 1879. This square was part of Reverend Thieves' original land purchase in 1874 and received permission for cemetery use under the same cemetery permit.
In 1890, Reverend Thieves decided to construct a mortuary chapel in St. Roch Cemetery number 2, dedicated to St. Michael the Archangel, and to lay out the grounds symmetrically. And by the summer of 1891, most of the brickwork for the new chapel was finished, and plans for its decoration were underway, including hopes for 2 skilled Carmelite monks to create the interior frescoes. Oh, I love a good fresco. Unfortunately, Reverend Thieves passed away in August of 1893 due to a brief illness caused by a skin infection before he could see the chapel completed. His devoted parishioners honored his wishes by interring his body beneath the marble floor of the center aisle at the foot of the altar in St. Roch Chapel.
Following Reverend Thieves' death, his successor continued to formalize the plans for St. Roch Cemetery number 2 and oversaw the completion of the chapel of St. Michael. A Mr. Brooks designed the cemetery layout, and grading of the land took place in the autumn of 1893. The construction of St. Michael's Chapel was finalized in 1895. In the 20th century, the chapel was transformed into St. Michael's Chapel Mausoleum.
Which I did see a picture of that online, and it's because there's stained glass windows and stuff in it. It just, when that light comes in through the stained glass windows and hits the crypts inside, it's just gorgeous. And it's all marble and it's so beautiful.
I kind of wish stained glass got brought back.
It does in certain instances, but yeah, this was definitely, if they were basing a lot of their design off the Italian churches and things, there would be a lot of stained glass. Both cemeteries have experienced significant changes since their inception, with ongoing restoration efforts for both chapels. In 2002, the St. Roch Chapel was recognized as a local historic landmark by the New Orleans Historic District Landmark Commission due to its architectural and historical importance. In 2022, New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries completed a full interior restoration of St. Roch Chapel, which now serves as the National Shrine of St. Roch, ensuring its historic integrity and securing its future.
Oh, that's
wow.
nice.
I'm glad it took a while for it to be recognized as a historic place. So that's wonderful that it is and will be protected.
Better late than never.
That's true.
Definitely. And I'm glad I'm glad that they have the funding to do that too now. And having it recognized as a historical landmark does help with the, getting the right funds and stuff to maintain.
Well, also
those
that
two
it's
cemeteries.
Mausoleum probably helps fund
for sure
the chapel.
Yeah. When you can put,
so it pays for itself, so to speak.
Yes. But what a great place, like if you have a loved one inside that mausoleum, what a great place to go and visit. Yeah, it's just gorgeous. So that is the actual, first two cemeteries, plus some other New Orleans cemeteries that are above ground that also inspired the game. But since they named it after St. Roch's, that's the ones we wanted to focus on for this. Yeah. So that is the portion of the game for Left 4 Dead.
Yes.
But you said these cemeteries are also in Red Dead Redemption 2, sort of.
Yeah. Yes. The town of Saint Denis, which you will always go to in chapter 4 of the game, you can easily access the city from as early as chapter 2, when you're free to explore the entirety of the game world. Um, Basically, Saint Denis is inspired by that kind of late industrial revolution period. That's at the turn of the century, and it's also inspired by just like the whole cultural center that is um, New Orleans at the time as well. And specifically because of just it being based around a swamp environment in general, it has this huge, like, grand city. It has pretty much every single shop that you can think of in the game, but it does also come with, the same flaws as, at night you could get mugged at any moment. But specifically, the cemetery, which is in this bottom right photo next to me, uh, specifically, that one is known as simply Saint Denis Cemetery, but is very much heavily inspired by all the cemeteries that exist in New Orleans. And you actually have a quest in that in chapter 4 called Angelo Bronte, a Man of Honor, where you, as Arthur Morgan, team up with John Marston to uh, deal with some grave robbers.
Fun.
Yes, and I think out of all the quests where you commit a crime, I think this is the one that you would be fine with.
Because you're trying to deter the grave robbers in this case.
Deter or kill.
Nice. So, and I'm sure, well, I know there's a lot of fictional stories, games,
Yeah,
movies, everything that are heavily inspired by these above ground cemeteries that are in New Orleans specifically. And I think that's why a lot of people are, even if you've never been to New Orleans, you're familiar with the cemetery
Right.
because they're shown in so many things. And so, and we've talked about some of them in our previous episodes with some of our other guests, but this is really cool that they're featured in these games like this and used in a way, well, yeah, used for Red Dead Redemption, used in a very historical way. I mean, grave robbing was a thing at the time.
yeah.
So I think that's very cool.
Although what's funny is while I was gathering screenshots for this episode, I was walking around the cemetery, and there's a lot of like large mausoleums and like statues and everything that just look really beautiful. But I found like a small campfire kind of close to one of the mausoleums. I was just like, oh, maybe that's where the grave robbers have been staying.
Oh, could be.
Yeah.
You figured it out. So moving on from New Orleans, we're going to stay in the South actually, but now we're going to Alabama. Now in the game, is it Alabama or is it something else?
In the game, every place is like inspired by a group of states and made into one fictional state.
So what is the fictional state? And in this game, are we in Red Dead Redemption or are we in?
We're in the second game.
So we're in Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yes,
And
and both this plantation and Saint Denis take place in the state of Lemoyne, which is very much based off of kind of just the South in general, but specifically the marshlands that Louisiana, Alabama are kind of known for.
okay. And
I love
so
it.
you end up going in the game to a plantation house. And the name in the game, what is it called?
It is known as Shady Belle, and it is an abandoned plantation that is actually taken up by a rival gang for chapters 2, 3, but in chapter 4 you actually take it over before abandoning it again in chapter 5 once the authorities actually find out that that's where you're living.
Gotcha. So it's used more as a hideout in the game.
Yes.
And if you look behind Dianne, Dianne's got the fictional version, which is in the top corner. And then in the lower corner is the actual version or the actual house that inspired the game version. And it's in Crumpton, Alabama, or Crumptonia, Alabama. I'm sorry. And it is located in the southwest corner of Dallas County. And the house itself is referred to as the Cochrane-Crumpton House, or sometimes just Crumptonia Plantation, and the McCrae House. So it's gone under a couple of different names depending on who's owned it throughout time. So it's a 2-story Greek Revival style home, and it was built somewhere around 1855. And I had a hard time finding a lot of information on the house other than some very basic things. Some dated it a little earlier, nothing after 1855, but it was built for South Carolina born Claudius M. Cochrane. And then it was later owned by the Crumpton family, and it became part of the Crumptonia Plantation. Now, there aren't any actual graves that I could find located on the plantation itself, although I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there had been a slave cemetery on or nearby, because we do know they did own slaves on that plantation at one point in time. And there are lots of stories about the house being haunted. There's also some local legend, although I couldn't find it, about Andrew Jackson hanging a man in the front yard of this particular plantation. And then much, much, much later in the 20th century, it was owned and farmed by a Mennonite family until they sold the property sometime in the early 2000s.
Well, if it was, you said you couldn't find anything after 1855 or prior to
Nothing, well,
1855.
after 1855, as far as it being built, like the house itself was supposedly built around between 1852 and 1855.
Let's say if Andrew Jackson was running around, it would have to have been built much sooner than that, correct?
Right. Okay. And the thing is, from the little bit of research that I was able to get on this area, I think there were other buildings on the property before this house existed.
Oh, okay.
So there is a chance that there was some other house or something there before this big, fancy house was built. The house itself was documented in the 30s, like they went in as part of the, what was that called during the Depression?
Like the WPA?
Yeah, they went in and actually photographed the whole thing. It wasn't being lived in at that point, and they went in and they photographed the whole thing and cared for it. But then, like I said, at some point, and I don't know exactly when, but this Mennonite family had purchased it, and they were there for a very long time, and they had livestock on it and they farmed it themselves. And they finally sold it sometime in the early 2000s. And then for a time, the property was in the hands of a family that was going to attempt to turn it into like a hunting lodge situation. I don't know that ever really happened. And I think the land and the house, again, are abandoned and for sale at this current time from things that I was seeing online. And I think there is a lot more information about it. I just don't think it's been digitized. So I didn't have a whole lot that I could go by to get more information on it.
Well, also on the property is Vaughn Cemetery.
It's at least near the property. I don't know if it's on the property, but it's near the property.
Yeah. So it's a abandoned cemetery in the woods, which is on private property. Perhaps they think maybe about 20 graves. It is surrounded by a damaged wrought iron fence. The largest stones there are to Fielding Vaughn, who was born in 1798 and died in 1867, and his spouse, Martha Hatcher Vaughn, who was born in 1804 and then died in 1859. I always like dying to do the math of husbands and wives, the age span.
Right. Yeah, she was definitely a little bit younger than him, although
not too much, not like some we've seen.
No.
Oh god, yeah.
But she did die much sooner than him if you look at the dates.
Right. And then of course there are other graves to be believed to be family members, and it is accessible only by hiking through the woods about a half mile from the nearest road. But there are no surviving roads nearby. But then also it mentioned it is on private property, so
yes. And I don't know if that private property happens to be part of the plantation property, or if it was some other property nearby. Crumptonia itself is Crumptonia, Alabama itself is named after the plantation, and it's just a small section. So it very well could be part of that property. The reason we're bringing up these graves comes up in just a moment, but the other grave is which is in another cemetery, is the grave of John A. Bell, who was a victim of a shootout. It is located in the new, in quotations, cemetery in the old Cahaba Park in Dallas County. And apparently on May 23rd, 1856, there was a shootout on the main street of Cahaba with J.R. Bell and his two sons against Will E. Bird, Matthew Troy, and Thomas Hunter, who were members of an extended family. This sounds very Western to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Most of the town watched while huddled behind shutters. J.R. Bell and his son, John A. Bell, were killed during the shootout. The survivors were exonerated in a court of law, but not in the eyes of the Bell family, judging from the inscription on the grave of John L. Bell, which reads, "No murder hath eternal life abiding in him." And if you look behind me, the photos posted behind me. So the one on the upper corner of the individual grave, that is John Bell's grave, with the, what is that called?
The coping wall? Or is that what you're talking about?
No, his grave itself, the monument on his grave.
The obelisk?
Yes, thank you. Obelisk is the word that I was looking for. And in the lower bottom corner is the Vaughn Cemetery, is a photo of the Vaughn Cemetery. And you can kind of see part of the wrought iron fence, and you can see some of the headstones that are in there. And then the upper portion of that is a picture of a cemetery in the game that is near the plantation site. Or is it on the plantation in the game?
It's on the plantation. However, some of the headstones, and although like you can't really see it too well in the photo, some of the headstones are actually like sunken or are sinking into the water.
So it kind of resembles the Vaughn Cemetery down on the bottom.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of cool that that was the Vaughn Cemetery, that just because that's my maiden name, although mine is spelled a little differently than this version. So I don't think there's any connection for
That's
me,
cool.
but it's pretty cool.
It is.
And then we just have a little information on Cahaba itself.
So Cahaba, and there's two spellings for it. One is Cahawba or Chaba, which I think that one would be much easier to remember, was Alabama's first state capital from 1820 to 1826.
Short-lived.
Yeah, very short. It became a ghost town shortly after the Civil War. Today, the old Cahaba site is an interpretive park that's operated by the Alabama Historic Commission. Visitors to the park had the opportunity to explore a landscape of ruins and relics, chimneys, gravestones, ornamental wellheads, and columns. Oh, I love that. I love that they left it in its rustic state instead of—
There you go, rustic.
Yeah. Instead of trying to fancy it up, that you could just walk among. I love that idea. That is really cool.
Yeah, so that grave of John Bell is definitely one that you can go see. It's part of that interpretive site. So his grave really and those other ones, if you look, you can see a couple other graves behind his in that photo. But yes, they're all, you can go and visit that, as well as some of the old buildings and whatever's left there. And then it gives you more of the history of that. Did we decide if there was a shootout similar to this that takes place in the game in this area? Or
Not really.
Okay. I couldn't remember.
Most of them just happen between rival gangs during that area. However, there is one headstone that is actually visible in that photo. You see that solid white headstone?
Yep.
Yeah. The grave on it, let me pull it up here, is of a Angus Dowd. And apparently it says, aged 19, tragically took her own lives and others on September 4th, 1883. However, here's something interesting. Angus Dowd, you can actually still see in the game as a ghost.
Oh,
well, that's cool.
Yeah, if you are in the swamps between 3 p.m. and 3 a.m. in-game time, since it works differently outside, if you go between those hours, you have a chance of having one of 16 encounters with her, chosen at random. And after the 16th encounter, she actually addresses you.
Well, that's creepy.
Yeah, and Arthur will write in his journal. Let's see if I can pull it up. Uh, it just had it. Here we go.
My God, how games have expanded.
Oh yeah.
It's
Yeah,
incredible.
no, games are wild today. But anyway, in the journal it says, "I cannot believe I am writing this, but there's something mighty strange in that swamp."
Well, maybe it's just swamp gas. No.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's what some people attribute it to. And so we have one final location that we're going to discuss. And Charlie, why don't you tell us about the game version of this last location while I get pictures changed out here?
All right. Uh, so in Red Dead Redemption 2, there's a small town that you can encounter just outside of the swamps, known as Pleasance. However, once you like actually find it, it's actually completely abandoned. There's not a single human being there. Um, and like there's just everything's empty, everything's crawling with vines and leaves, and strangely enough, there's not even really any animals that will gather apart from like deer. But as soon as you approach the deer in any other way, they'll just run off. But as Arthur writes down, it's just a small abandoned town, and but walking around it seems a bit more strange than just what you will first see. As written on a barn, it says "Stay out, plague," which is just a little bit of like a reference to the Walking Dead series. But especially on the image you have behind you, Jen, is one of the smaller houses. The text that's kind of obscured by the vine says "unclean sinners," and on the door, as you can see, it says "ill with sin." And it's a location that's always captured my interest because out of all the other towns, both inhabited and not, it's a lot more creepy than it should be. Because even like the first kind of abandoned town that you encounter in chapter one called Coulter, there's nothing really creepy about it. It's just like an old abandoned mining town that's just only rotting because there's only no one to take care of it. But this one, there's something going on that's just never explained. The only thing that is explained is a massacre happening where, let's see, what was it? 10 locals were murdered during this event. Either being shot or stabbed were the causes of death. And strangely enough, pretty much any graveyard, I mean, any grave in the graveyard of this place will have the date of 1883 as the last date on any of those graves.
Hmm.
Yes.
Does that tie in with what's her name? Angus?
Not Angus Dowd. She is a completely separate case as she
Okay.
died. Oh.
I thought it was 1883 and she took
Oh
others
yeah,
with her.
you're actually right. Now that I look at my notes. Mm, that is a keen eye.
It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
So, this particular town, Pleasant, which is not so pleasant, is actually based on a town in Ohio, which I think if you are a fan of anything paranormal, anything creepy, all of those creepy ghost story things that come across, this one comes up a lot. That because it's been dubbed or nicknamed Helltown. It's not the actual name of the town, but if you look on any of those paranormal sites, any books that talk about this, it comes up as Helltown, Ohio. It was actually originally called Boston, Ohio, and it was founded in 1805 and became an official township in 1811. And its original claim to fame was its standing as the oldest village in Summit County, Ohio.
In its early years, the township's economy was bolstered by the construction of the Ohio and Erie Canal between 1825 and 1827, which provided a vital transportation route for goods and people. Ultimately, this also led to substantial economic growth in the region, drawing in more farmers and workers to aid in the transport of lumber, flour, quarried stone, bricks, and agricultural products to markets in Cleveland and Akron.
It's a busy place. In 1836, the village of Peninsula became the largest in the township. It was incorporated in 1859 and thrived thanks to its strategic location along the canal, hosting boatyards, dry docks, hotels, and saloons, and catering to canal workers and travelers. The region saw another major shift in 1880 upon the arrival of the Valley Railway, which marked the start of a notable shift from canal transport to rail transport.
Unfortunately, there was a huge flood in 1913, which the community never recovered from.
And that was actually one of many. They had several other floods. I mean, think about it. You're built on the river near a canal. And there were other floods prior to this. And there was another really big one. I believe it was in 1937. So all of these floods continually affected this. In 1974, Boston faced challenges when it became a target due to nationwide concerns over forest loss. President Gerald Ford's bill allowed the National Park Service to acquire land, leading to the establishment of Cayuga Valley National Park in the Boston Township, resulting in the purchase of properties from all the longtime residents that were there.
Citizens were forced to leave their homes and express their sentiment with a message stating, "Now we know how the Indians felt."
That was left painted on a barn there.
The abandoned houses were boarded up with no trespassing signs, and the government's park creation plan stalled, leaving the village neglected. The remaining structures of the vanished town had led to numerous urban legends over the years.
So there are a whole lot more than we're going to mention here. And again, if you're really that curious about them, you can go look them up. The biggest problem that I have with this is that it has perpetuated both in the town and the cemetery that is part of the town, people going in and vandalizing it, unfortunately. Because, and we've talked about this with some of our haunted cemeteries and stuff, people get all excited to go in and do things, and then it gets really not so good. Yeah. So one of the big legends there is a government cover-up to hide the fact, this is why this town became abandoned, according to this legend, a government cover-up to hide the fact that they spilled deadly chemicals in the area. And these chemicals have caused bizarre mutations to area residents and their children and the animals. But the truth, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No.
I was going to say, but the truth is stories regarding a government conspiracy refer to the area where the chemicals were spilled as either Butane Town, Mutane Town, or Mutant Town. The first two named after the chemical said to have been spilled, and the last describing the results of the alleged spill. Records show that there was never any kind of chemical spill in the area ever.
Maybe that's where the turtles hang out on their days off.
You know, it's better than the sewer, maybe.
Exactly.
I mean,
a little fresher air.
Yeah, definitely got to smell way
home.
better.
Right?
Yeah, although...
other legends... Sorry, Charlie.
It's okay. It's just that you mentioned the chemical spill and how it affected the animals, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that might tie into something a little later when you cover the other theory.
Yes.
Okay,
Just as a little bit of foreshadowing.
So other legends that local churches are used for a satanic cult. That one seems to be probably more popular than it should be.
In more places than just this place, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The church has upside down crosses all over it. But the truth of the matter is, there are in fact two churches to which these legends refer: Boston Community and Mother of Sorrows. Mothers of Sorrows is a church alleged to have upside down crosses hanging from it. The crosses are actually design elements in the church's gingerbread trim, which occur quite frequently in the Gothic revival style of architecture. Both churches are listed in local directories, something that would be unlikely if they were affiliated with a secret cult. And in an effort to curb the trespassing and vandalism that is taking place, Boston Township trustees have asked the Summit County Sheriff's Office Department to tell individuals to move along should they be found loitering in certain areas of the night, including near the cemetery.
So there were also, I mean, there's rumors that the cemetery is haunted. I had to laugh. One of the rumors is about some ghost that apparently sits on the bench in the cemetery, except that there are no benches in the cemetery. So I don't know how the ghost is sitting on the bench in the
Ghost
cemetery
bench.
that doesn't exist.
Ghost bench.
And then there's also, so that's where in the game, these satanic worship things kind of comes into play in the game with the notes on the doors and stuff. The other thing that perpetuated is there was an abandoned school bus in the town, and the rumors were that some serial killer went on and killed all the kids on the bus and, you know, left their bodies there or whatever. And so that was the other rumor of a massacre in town. And then the last big rumor was that because of the chemical spills, there was a giant snake python that was living in the village. And, you know, if you walked into town, you could be eaten by this giant mutant python that was infected by the chemical spill.
I mean,
that didn't happen, by the way.
That didn't happen, yeah.
No chemical spill.
I'm pretty sure butane doesn't even do that.
Somebody had to have started those. So I just wonder if you're sitting there and you're going, hey, let's make up a story about a giant mutated snake.
That would be funny.
Children in a school bus.
Exactly.
Yeah. But speaking of a giant snake, if you ever go to Pleasance, go to the 2 burned buildings that happened after the town was abandoned, and you go south of them, there's a chance you might see a tree, and hanging from that tree, already dead, thankfully, is a giant snake.
So we know where all that inspiration came from. It came from these rumors of this abandoned town. And I can see where, you know, I think any town, any ghost town, even our older ones, like our, you know, all our Colorado ghost towns, we have a lot of them thanks to the gold rush. There's always a story about a haunting or some other thing. I do think it's interesting because this town wasn't abandoned until the 70s when the government bought it out and then kicked all the residents out because they were going to turn it into forest land, and then they didn't. But I could see if somebody came across it or lived nearby, and, you know, especially teenagers, if they were bored and they got together and they went and hung out in the cemetery there, as they would do, I could see where these stories would start. And, you know, you want to scare your friends, and then they perpetuate. Unfortunately, these have become so popular that people have traveled from all over the country to go specifically to Boston, Ohio, not really Helltown, Ohio. That's just what it's been named. It does have a bunch of other rumors about the roads leading to hell and all this other stuff. I didn't even go into all of the legends on here because I was kind of going with the ones that pertained more to what they seem to be inspired by in the game itself.
Okay.
But
there's so many. There were so many when we looked into this.
It was like huge lists, and I had Charlie come and I was like, so tell me which ones actually like apply to the game so that we don't go through everything.
It was a whole 2. Well, not even 2. It's like 1.5 because one of them kind of talked about some things that just didn't really pertain, like a madman living in the basement of the church.
Right. There's another one. Ugh. Yeah. So please don't go, especially to the cemetery, because there is a cemetery there and there's real people buried in the cemetery that were there prior to the abandonment of this town. Let them rest in peace, folks.
Yeah, please.
Let them. I mean, if you want to go and document the cemetery for the sake of documenting the cemetery, like for find a grave and all of that, that's great. You know, for genealogical purposes, yes. But then go during the day. Don't go at night. Don't start fires in the cemetery. Don't burn your candles on the graves.
Yeah.
Be respectful. But we did find it fun that there are so many connections to these real life cemeteries that really exist in different parts of the country. in these two games. And I'm sure there's many
Pretty
other
cool.
video games and stuff that have them too, but these
There
are
is
the
quite
ones
a
that
few
you
I can
play,
mention.
Charlie. So these are
Yeah,
the
I can
ones.
I could mention quite a few. I mean, there's one game I play called Fallout 4 that takes place kind of in a general Massachusetts area, but features Boston and Salem
Oh,
and some
yeah. And
cemeteries.
a lot of those cemeteries.
Yeah.
So it's always fun to see those places, especially if we've been to them and see
Hmm.
how they're being used. So I do appreciate that game designers now are taking their inspiration from some of these real places. And it's created online because there are these fandoms where people write about how these games relate to the real life places that they correspond to, and so that's what got us interested in doing this particular episode, was we could talk about how they're kind of used in the gameplay and how some of the rumors and things about them get incorporated into the gameplay, but into storylines that are still completely made up.
But
And
still, it might introduce somebody to explore history that they never would have even considered if they hadn't been introduced to it through a video game.
I mean, definitely Red Dead Redemption kind of like kickstarted like a late Victorian interest for me because whenever I think about the Victorian era, it usually cuts off about 1870. Like it goes from like when actually like Queen Victoria takes power and then it goes up until like 1870 because typically we don't think of that area as so important, mainly because I think it gets overshadowed by two world wars that follow like 14 years afterwards.
true. But yeah, I like the fact that these games, now I don't play a ton of video games, but I play the Nancy Drew games that are for the PC. Those I do play, but there's so many of these other games that a lot of people play that are inspired by real things and history. And yeah, if it gets somebody excited about history or a certain time point in history, I think that is awesome. So kudos to the game designers for that. I know a lot of times these video games are given sort of a hard time,
Right.
especially by older generations, because
Yeah.
they do, these mature games do have violence in them and things. But when you think about it, history has a lot of violence in it too. So
Oh, yeah.
if I don't want to perpetuate violence, but if that's historically accurate to the time period, then you're
You
thinking,
kind of
why
have to
not?
cover it.
And if you're doing a video game about zombies, it's going to be a little bit violent too because
Yeah.
there's zombies.
Yeah, I
But there's
don't
So
think
zombies.
there's Winnie the
You
Pooh.
kind of gotta defend yourself from them.
true.
I don't think there's a Winnie the Pooh zombies, so yeah.
Yeah. And zombies have become definitely a fascinating part of our pop culture. Like there's
It's true.
zombie stuff all over the place. And so, well, I am not a fan of zombies. They are my least favorite of all the monsters, but that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
These games are really cool in the fact that they do have this, and hopefully, yeah, maybe we've gained some history buffs because they played a particular game, Red Dead
Mhm.
Redemption or Left 4 Dead, or what was the other one you just mentioned, Char?
Fallout 4.
Fallout. Oh yeah, the Fallout games, because that's like
Yeah.
post
It's
apocalyptic.
Yeah, it's post-nuclear apocalypse,
Yeah,
and while it's more like sci-fi set in the far future, uh,
it starts in the 50s.
well, not really actually. It's based off of the style of the
Mm,
50s,
that's true.
but the early,
Stylistically, it's kind of cool.
yeah, stylistically it's beautiful, but um, the earliest date in the game that like really matters is set in like the 2050s, so
Ah,
even further than we are now.
but yeah, so it's worth sometimes playing the game. So if you're old enough, check out these games if you're interested in video games and if you like video games and history. The Red Dead Redemption, I know, definitely sparked a lot of Charlie's interest in certain historical things because
I mean,
he
I've
was
seen it and I was like, I want to play it as it is Old West. So
yeah. So if you like westerns, especially anything Old West, and if you want the gunfights and all the things that the Old West, we think about in the both historical and fictional realms of the Old
right.
West, Red Dead Redemption is definitely a game that will do
Yeah,
that
I had to go check
It
that
is
out.
for
very
you.
nice. It is very good.
Well, Charlie, thank you so much for the research you did for
Shirley.
this.
Oh,
Thanks
I
for
always
helping us
love it when you're
put
on
this
with
episode
us.
together. We hope folks enjoyed it.
I mean, you're the ones that gave me this idea, so thank you.
Well, you actually initially started it because you had said a long time ago, you should talk about, this fictional cemetery. And then
Yeah. It was
I,
more so of a monument in a different game called Fallout New Vegas. And like see if you could draw some sort of like real precedent for like how monuments are constructed.
oh, well, we might have to do that one later
Mm.
on. But this one was fun. And I knew
Yes.
Dianne would enjoy the Western aspect of
Yeah,
it.
of course.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more about today's episode, visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you'll find additional links in our show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel. And if you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Your support helps others find our show and discover all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
You can also follow us on social media for cemetery facts, photos, quotes, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery and on X at OrdExtraSim. If you'd like to help support us financially, you can donate a cup of coffee by clicking on the coffee cup icon on our website or YouTube, or purchase some of our fabulous Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery merchandise through our store link.
Until we meet again.